Want me seated here?
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, welcome back to Live from the Heartland. That was a little bit of Mavis Staples to try to get us warmed up on a gray Saturday morning. Katie was talking about the need to have pretty thorough discussion off of David Orr's retirement for what happens next and how we bring new leaders in, and we have one of those new leaders with us this morning, Maria Hadden, who is automatic candidate
We're
for
gonna get it
49th
straight.
Ward. We have 4 candidates who have filed, including incumbent Joe Moore and Bill Morton, and I forget who the 4th is, I should know. But in any event, Maria, thank you so much for joining us. And I always start this conversation off for people who are starting off in politics. Why is such a nice person like Maria running for politics?
Because we need better people in politics, is the short answer. So I'm not originally from Chicago, from Columbus, Ohio, but I've been here for 15 years and working adjacent to politics, so working with elected officials and working with community groups that are trying to affect change, like in how our government works. In Chicago and about half a dozen cities around the country, it's became clear to me over these last 8 years that some of those skills, building with people and working on the outside of politics, are the same kind of behaviors and attitudes that we need in our political arena. And the only way we're going to get it is by continuing to support independent progressive people running for office and getting enough of us in there.
Did you know that David Orr was from Ohio too?
I did not know that David was from Ohio. I always tell everybody there are great people from Ohio.
Yeah, there are great people from Ohio. A whole Midwestern kind of thing going on.
Yeah, you know, we
So-
love coming to Chicago.
How long have you been? How long since you declared you were running?
It's been almost a year.
Yeah, that's
so
what I thought.
I launched January 20th of 2018, so of this year, on my birthday.
Yes.
Yes.
We are all January birthdays here, or February. We're Capricorns and Aquarians. All right. So, just why don't you give us your main platform issues, the things that you try and make sure every audience hears from you when you greet them in the neighborhood. The short version, of course, but
Yeah.
you know.
No. So, you know, I've lived in the 49th Ward for 11 years and pretty centrally in the East Rogers Park community. And in my time there, before campaigning and since starting this campaign, talking to hundreds and hundreds of our neighbors, the issues that people in the 49th Ward want to see, we want to maintain affordable housing. We want to make sure we can stay in Rogers Park and in the 49th Ward, you know, through whatever next wave of development we're facing. We want accessible housing. We want to have good neighborhood public schools, and I plan to be a champion for that, where the current alderman has not been. We want to support our small, locally owned businesses because it makes up a diverse part of our community and supporting a lot of our efforts. We want a safe and healthy community, looking at how we need to develop better relationships in our community with one another through block clubs and other efforts that are not just about adding more police, because community safety looks different for different people. And we also want to see good government, so just accountability and transparency. So one of the biggest challenges I see overall in Chicago, but in the 49th Ward too, is how frequently community members are kind of pushed aside, told that we don't matter, and that our voices are not centered in decision making, and that's something that needs to change.
So, you know, for many, many years, Joe Moore's been in office for a long time.
28 years almost.
28 years. All right. So when he hears you say something like you just said, and he goes, "Oh no, I don't push people aside. I've invited them in. I've had community meetings out the yin yang for 28 years." How do you respond to that?
Sure. He has. There are some great things that he's done. So I know you guys are all familiar with the participatory budgeting process, so PB 49. So he's the first elected official in the United States, right, to bring this very transparent, community-centered decision-making process to our community. I was a volunteer in that first year, and participating actually really put me on a trajectory to bring this work to more spaces. And also, just because you have one program that's engaging there are a lot of decisions that he makes and that city councilors make around the city that have bigger impacts on the lives of Chicagoans, like around the funding for our schools, what's happening with our long-term infrastructure plans, what we're doing in our finance committees to pay off lawsuits and issues with accountability, how our large city agencies are working, and also who gets to build in our community, right, around development and zoning decisions. And for those major decisions, largely we're closed out of them. And the people that are involved are usually a small group of people that some of whom have been around for 28 years. We don't need to exclude those people, but I believe it's the role of an elected official to always be bringing in new people to the table and centering folks most impacted by decisions and decision making. I don't think he does a good job of that.
What do you think you could do that would change the dynamic we've been going through all this summer with an apparent upsurge in shooting? Now, I've been in the neighborhood 28 years. I remember when things were worse, but I'm not sure better or worse is the right way to talk about community safety,
right.
because there's so many emotions and personal on-the-street experience. Well, you've been there as well. How do we deal with the current sense of, we got to change our habits because of these random shootings? Or not so random, depending on one's point of view or the particular incident?
No, that's a good question, and certainly I've lived in the ward long enough to know like on paper that our violent crimes and our shootings are down.
That's right.
So like factually they're lower, and also you're absolutely right. Every shooting matters, right? And it matters to someone, and it impacts and ripples out through communities. And how we feel and how our leaders and institutions support us in getting through and dealing with these tragedies is super important. One of the things I've been happiest to see and am supportive of and intend to support more as in office as well is the resurgence of people starting new block clubs. So we need to know each other block by block. Having those close connections adds to senses of safety, both in how we're feeling and real results, right? So if we think about crime prevention, the prevention of all kinds of maybe negative behaviors, us knowing each other, we can look out for one another.
Yeah.
The other piece of it is it also adds to the real safety of some of the negative things we saw, right, with this kind of Rogers Park shooter, the kind of unexplained, still at large shootings that we had. There, we had some really terrible instances of neighbors going into vigilantism, right? We had a couple folks dragging people off the street to the police station and profiling, African American men that fit the description. And, some block clubs, making sure that we have training focused on equity, focused on how we make inclusive spaces for one another, are ways that we can build safety for everyone, and also a tighter knit, resilient community, so that when some unpreventable tragedies strike, we can bounce back and take care of one another moving forward.
The profiling that you just described, that fellow who everyone is scared of, the lone shooter, has not even been identified by race because his face was covered. And so I think they initially did identify him racially and then pulled back
And they
from
retracted,
that.
Yep.
Because it really is, you cannot tell. And and the different weight accorded different crimes. For example, I heard on the news the other morning that there was a murder in Rogers Park at 11 o'clock the night before. I went to the websites. There was nothing about it. The alderman had something about his Follow Me on Friday. He had some other thing up that had just been put up, but nothing about this murder, which then later we knew the name of the victim, and we also knew it was not that guy who's just shooting people anonymously.
Right.
Which means it's a lesser importance because it's these quote unquote bad guys or the bad element in the neighborhood shooting each other. I think we should still be concerned, right?
Absolutely, and it says something about us as a community,
Yeah.
and our leaders, and especially our elected leaders, I think have the responsibility to set the tone, and it devalues whole areas of our ward.
Amen.
And whole groups of people in our ward when certain crimes are and victims are given like higher priority, and also I think there's this practice of deeming them as innocent victims. You know, when you
Yes,
see people
right.
talking about, well, we had these innocent victims.
Right. Yeah, like the
You know,
others are guilty.
nobody deserves to be shot and killed.
Right.
And we need to make sure that we're working towards a space where we are reducing as many of those murders and tragedies as possible, and also taking seriously the impact. So that the latest murder victim, he's a father of a child in one of our Rogers Park schools.
Right.
Yeah.
Maria, I was going to take it back to the election of next group of alder people in our city council, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are, and if you have any ties with progressives running in other wards. There's a lot of independent political organizations, and just share a little of that information so we get a sense of the kind of swell, the groundswell that's coming.
This is my first time running for office. You guys know that, and it's been one of the most positive, challenging but positive experiences that I've ever had, and it is because we've got a lot of like-minded younger folks around the city that are kind of taking up this challenge. We see a Chicago and people in leadership elected positions that are not solving our problems. They're not taking them seriously, and especially being a part of a lot of youth-led movements over the last 4 or 5 years, there's a sentiment that a lot of folks in city council are not taking seriously the voices of young people in Chicago. And so now a lot of them are running for office. So you may see a little hashtag and some branding around for brand new council. I don't know if you've seen this, but it's several folks, and it's not just one candidate in each ward, but several, sometimes multiple candidates in different wards, where we've been trying to support one another, knowing that we're going through kind of shared experiences, and I think largely have a lot of shared visions of getting in and being a more accountable group of people that's more representative and more inclusive, in changing the style of how city council works, not just changing the people, but changing the culture.
I was going to bring up, I was talking to one of Joe Moore's favorite people, and their account of your race is basically that you're going to get the millennials. And I would imagine, and what I said, I think she has a larger base than that. I think there are people of all ages, all races, etc., who are disenchanted with the current situation or are looking for a change. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes. So, I mean, I see it in, races around the country, but also in, every conversation that I have at the doors with residents in our community. I've been pretty involved for a while, so I didn't start from scratch, right? Like, know a lot of people. And also I'm meeting so many more folks who had no idea who I was. And just like folks in my parents' generation, right? Like my parents are, mid-60s, early 70s. They are looking to younger leaders to take up this space and to take on these challenges. So I don't think it's just a millennial vote, though I will note that the largest age group in the 49th ward is my age group.
Which is?
So I'm like, so folks that are somewhere between like 25 and like 40. Yeah, I'm 38.
Getting up there.
I want to return to participatory budgeting as a template or a starting point. Joe Moore rightfully gets credit for starting this particular approach, but 15 years later that it's been going, 10 years later, we're still talking about a big process to look at $1 million being split up. And I'm wondering why there's not more money in that pot, and to what extent that template to do murals and fix sidewalks and whatnot, money that I think should come out of the capital budget of the city, not out of the Alderman's discretionary fund. How we could expand that kind of approach to community decision making over resources to not only murals, but schools, escalators at the Morris L, improvements in the lakefront, our great country club. How do we actually bring what participatory budgeting has been teaching us over 10 years into the rest of city government?
Or to put it another way, do we continue to have to do Hunger Games in order to get things
Basics?
to things that should be part of the budget anyway?
Yeah, no, these are great questions. So from the first experience in the 49th ward, right, so that's 2009 to 2010, I actually, the two folks that helped Joe design our process, and this community-based design process, Jean Paulo Beoki and Josh Lerner, I called them up after our first year, and I decided this was what I wanted to do. And if they were doing this and helping other folks get PB started around the country, I wanted to be a part of it. So I was one of the founding board members of the Participatory Budgeting Project. So around the world, PB is hitting 30 years, and we're hitting 10 years in the United States. Most places, most PB processes, they're citywide, they're larger budgets, and they're also not just restricted to bond money, right? So there are less restrictive funds. To give you an interesting visual of what we could be doing in Chicago with PB versus what we're currently doing. So Chicago started in 2009 with our 49th Ward process. Based on the 49th Ward demonstration as a pilot, we were able to get 4 council members in New York City working with an organization called Community Voices Heard to get them started. So they started a year later, 2010, 2011. There are 51 council districts in New York City, and now roughly 35 of them do participatory budgeting with anywhere from $1 million to $2 million, and it's a more lenient budget, not as restrictive, and there are some more interesting projects, higher levels of engagement that we're seeing there, and we've been able to move it to where it was institutionalized within the city, right? The city put real resources behind it. Here in Chicago, call it our culture, a lot of it really has been a stop at the mayor's office of plenty. I think we've had upwards of a dozen aldermen that have done it in total. We currently have 8 out of 50. So compared to New York, we haven't seen the same political leadership stepping up to move it beyond the ward system. And I think that that's indicative of the same things we see with how Chicago aldermen work. If things are working in their ward and they're turning out fine for them, they're content to just sit back and not progress. And so people do PB processes around citywide issues, focusing on youth engagement. And the longest running North American experiment is with public housing. Toronto Community Housing, where public housing residents get to decide how to spend upwards of $9 million for making real improvements. So there's so many ways we can use this to engage young people, to fix real issues with our schools, to make larger decisions about infrastructure. It's a great civic education tool and something I plan to continue, but really think in the city we need to move beyond just the menu money and see where we can use this tool to really activate more people to be more active in government.
So it's May or June of 2019, and you've just taken your first seat in the city council as a new alderman of the 49th Ward. What's the first thing you tackle? Is it a roof at Kilmer?
I like that. I like that.
What's
part.
your
Or is it a
first thing?
berm along
What's the first thing
Viola
that you're
Park?
getting out?
So definitely at the citywide level, you mentioned kind of the new roof at Kilmer. I am very motivated to figure out how we're going to push CPS to have a fair and equitable funding formula for our schools. I think that's a top priority. And also another priority. You guys know I talk about development without displacement for our ward and looking at aldermanic decision making around zoning. At the citywide level, I think we need to push more of what we're seeing, some more policies and practices that we see and what actually the mayor's promoting in this little village in Pilsen kind of restoration development plan, where we're increasing the levels, like the percentage requirements of affordable housing in developments, putting a floor where developers can't buy out, implementing some funding, some grant or low income or kind of low interest loan programs for small owners, like those 1 to 4 unit owners, to get money for capital improvements for their building. And so looking at what we can provide in city programs to make sure that in the 49th Ward we can manage development without displacing a bunch of our residents, and working to see that CPS is moving forward to make sure that every child in Chicago is getting the resources that they need would be 2 of my top priorities.
Okay.
So, God, there's so much to do in this city.
Yeah.
There's so much in need of help. And, a lot of us, those of us who were alive when Harold Washington was mayor, we have a picture of what a city working together can actually accomplish with good leadership at the center of it. When Harold Washington was elected, suddenly half of the aldermen became progressive because they had to. Because if their voters saw them vote or be against Harold Washington, they would be out in a moment. So we probably don't have that this year. We have a lot of good candidates for mayor. I mean, we have a lot. I feel interested in the mayor's race because I see the top 3 or 4 people right now as all women of color running. As a woman of color yourself and a lesbian, what kind of pushback have you gotten on that basis alone in the race this far?
You know, I think it speaks to our ward and our community that not much.
Yeah.
Advantages in some ways.
Yeah, right. So not much. I will say though that though I've spent my life working in like nonprofits and public service and volunteering, both my university degrees are focused on public service. Some of those barriers of being a woman of color, specifically,
Right.
were kind of built into me even thinking I'd run for office.
Yeah,
I
sure.
never thought I'd run for office.
Sure.
So while once making the decision
Yeah.
and talking to folks, I found nothing but a supportive environment. I think that, women of color and other marginalized like folks still have these built-in socialized barriers. That
Turns
sometimes
out to be a great year to run as a woman of color.
Yeah.
As it turns out. And this other question that I know that people will raise after a guy being in office for 28 years, people like stability or what they perceive as stability. And he came into office following David Orr, who had one of the best service offices in the city. And he continued to have a great service office.
Well,
So
he got it better after he almost lost an election. Then he upped the ante.
He did. But I guess what we're asking is why should 49th Ward voters replace someone with such a great staff who is so responsive compared to others, which I've always said about people who live in the 49th Ward have no idea what hell it is to be in a ward that's represented by somebody who really never looks at their own backyard. What do you say to folks who say, yeah, I'm kind of comfortable, I don't see anything wrong, really, what?
Well, I mean, it's always folks who aren't feeling the pain, who don't understand the need for change, one.
Bingo.
But two, I understand and firmly believe that the ward service office needs to be a core kind of touchstone for the community. So beyond having, fantastic staff that I think are going to be very important. Like I believe it's a high priority to have good customer service, knowledgeable people who actually like people. And who treat people with respect in an office. But also the office needs to be a hub for other information. So a lot of our ward services, a lot of the things people traditionally think about, they're centralized, and we need to manage them and connect people to the right place. But we also shouldn't be paying people $116,000 a year just to manage 311 requests. We've got a whole city to run, and we need aldermen that are going to step up to those challenges, because we need a Chicago that's going to be here for the next 100 years. And the way City Council's running it now, it won't be.
Ray Hadden, candidate for 49th Ward Alderman. We wish you best in the coming campaign, and thank you for joining us on Live from the Heartland.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Any last thing, Maria Hadden, for the listeners out there?
I'd just say pay attention to your aldermanic races. So there's going to be a lot of coverage on the mayoral stuff, and you'll have your time to consider. But if you live in the 49th Ward, check out my website. It's Maria for 49.
Has anybody given you $20,000?
No one has given me $20,000, but if anyone wants to give me $5,600, that's the limit I can accept. From individuals. So
you heard it there
definitely
first.
Taking donations.
Step up, you individuals.
But if you don't live in the 49th Ward, check out your aldermanic races, because I definitely agree with you guys. Like, our city council is going to be an important piece of what's happening over the next 4 years.
Bless your heart, and good luck, Maria Hadden.
Thank you.
Going forward.
You're
Thanks.
listening to Live from the Heartland on WLUW 88.7 FM.